Welcome to our tea talk today. Hi, Kat. Hi, Nika.
Hi, Kat. Hi, Nika.
We have Christa Ovenell with us today. We'll give it maybe another minute to see if anyone else comes in and then introduce you and start this conversation.
Wonderful.
Yes, it's a
And when you
conversation close to our hearts.
good.
Just because I actually was teaching about the embalming process today and my time of being a funeral director with SCI. So I
Ooh.
have, yeah.
Yep. So you have a hello, Kat. Hi.
Seeing faces is great.
It's so nice.
Mhm. Yes, nice to see yours. Oh, yay. Hi, is it
Hi,
Nika?
Nika.
Hi.
Great.
Nico lives like only a few blocks from me in
Oh,
Colorado
yeah?
Oh, I love
Springs.
it.
I didn't know it at the time until I was sending out a package and I was like, "Oh, hi
Wait a
neighbor."
minute, I could walk this over.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, this is bittersweet for Lauren and I because it's going to be our last tea talk. So thanks to those of you who are here with us live, and to everybody who's watching. And thank you to our guest today, Christa Overnell. For the last several years, Lauren and I don't even know how many years. I'd be like 8, and Lauren would be like, no, 5. So I don't know, however many years it's been.
Time doesn't
Um,
exist. It's fine.
time
No, we
doesn't
know that.
exist. Got one more friend we're letting in right now. Have done these tea talks once a month, and we've always kind of been scouting, the landscape, this niche of death education and death doulaship, and people who exist in different areas of it. Which is one of the cool things about this space is it's broad and it's vast. And we've had a number of awesome guests come and teach us what they know. And so to have you, Christa, round us out feels really great because you're a jack of all trades, a funeral director and an embalmer, and know all of the conventional stuff, but also a death doula and someone stepping into kind of what this next phase of death care might look like. So thanks for joining us today.
You're so welcome. Yeah, thank you. Is that the formal? Am I to go
You're
now?
introduced. Yes.
Sure.
Okay, that is
Educators
great.
and introducing educators is
I
the
just
best.
love it. That's
Take it
so good.
over.
So good. So, yes, I am. I'm Christa Ovenell. I'm a funeral director, embalmer, end of life doula, and getting me to shut up about this stuff is kind of the trick. So people will need to watch the clock for me, and I know that we have sort of a formal space and time, if you will, for questions and answers, but especially if something that I'm saying is not clear to you and it's going to disturb your ability to focus on what I am talking about, please just unmute and be like, wait, I need to clarify something. And if as we're going, you're like, oh, I really, please, we're a small enough group and you're warmly welcome to do that. I might say, oh, I'm about to get to that. Or we might just go down some exciting new path together. So just please be welcome, be with me, be with us today. Something that I was so grateful for when Death Wives and I started talking about this event was the openness to what is sometimes a bit of a divisive topic, especially in the death curious space, especially in home death caring, in alternative death caring communities. And as someone, I'm one of very few, like under a dozen in North America, who are both funeral director and embalmers, who are also end of life doulas. There's a good handful of us who are funeral directors and end of life doulas, but there's hardly any of us who hold a dual license. And and sometimes I'm going to say people will look at me funny, and I am okay with that. And so it's become a bit of a passion of mine to talk about this weird skill and this weird trade that I have, and how I genuinely believe that embalming is not an enemy of community-led death caring. And in fact, it can be something that is used well in a community death caring space. And and the more we know about it, the better able we are to call upon it and bring it when we need it. I want to say very, very clearly that I am absolutely not pro embalming in all circumstances. There is just in so many circumstances, there is simply no need for embalming. Period, full stop. I will also acknowledge that there are some significant negative environmental impacts from embalming, and I'm not supportive of that. I'm a very green uh, death care practitioner, and I still think that there is a space for embalming in specific circumstances. So, if it's okay, Erin and Lauren, can I talk a bit about the process itself?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, embalming is kind of falling out of favor for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons is that it has always been sort of associated with viewing a dead body, and viewing dead bodies is becoming less and less common in this race and rush to immediate, direct, cheapest, often called simple cremation. Viewings are often going out the window, and I think it's kind of unfortunate that embalming and viewing have been so closely tied, but that is the case. So as we see a decline in viewings, we also see a decline in embalming. And embalming is itself the practice of essentially removing the natural fluids that are in our bodies, even after we're dead, and replacing those natural fluids with chemicals. These chemicals typically are quite formaldehyde heavy or have formaldehyde compounds within them, a bunch of other things too. There's in order to safely embalm someone, an embalmer needs to be suited up in full PPE, full personal protective gear, masks, eye coverings, obviously gloves, and shields and aprons and it's a lot. You look kind of like you're going into some scene on a spaceship or something. But that is partly because we're dealing with removing the natural fluids. Blood is a big part of that from a dead human body, and then replacing it with these relatively dangerous chemicals. So arterial embalming is where we raise an artery, often the carotid, but there are a bunch of other arteries that we might consider bringing up, and insert a device that will allow us to pump this fluid through the arteries so that it flows through the entire body and essentially preserves the body from the inside. All right. We're also usually using some form of drainage to help get those natural fluids out. A bunch of different ways that you can do that. And all of this is taking place on what looks a lot like an operating table. It'll probably be angled a little bit, and the fluids will run down the body. The body is bathed. The body is then embalmed. Then it's bathed again. And then after it's stitched up and whatnot, then it will move on to dressing and casketing. A simple embalming could take, God, I worked with some people who, honest to God, could do an embalming in 20 minutes. Just the inside part, just the one piece of it. But you could probably, for a simple embalming, be done in 45 minutes to an hour and a half, quite easily. And then, once dried and bathed and dressed and everything, a couple of hours, right? I also once worked on an embalming myself that was not simple at all, and I was alone, and it took me 7 hours to work through everything that needed to happen for this case. This woman who had died from anorexia, who was an amputee, who had been autopsied, and had other issues on her body that needed to be attended to. I've also been present when I was an apprentice, and I was working with this masterful embalmer. We were together for a full day, 8.5 hours, working on a body who had been a long bone donor, and every organ in their body had also been donated, including eye enucleation. So there's quite a range of how short or how long it can take, but typically you're probably looking at somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half. All right. Um, I'm going to pause right there, and it's a very, very high level summary, but are there any questions about the process itself? Good. So, so embalming has, as I say, it's fallen out of favor. Oh, it's just another person. Okay. Embalming has fallen out of favor a little bit. And it's always been a bit shrouded in mystery too. And part of that is that as non-embalmers and non-licensed professionals, you can't get into the embalming room. So in all of our states and provinces in North America, this is very carefully regulated, and so we can't. It's actually been really hard, even with the rise of like TikTok morticians and whatnot. They have to be super careful about what they show. Thank God, because I think things could get really inappropriate very quickly. But it is very difficult to kind of pull back the curtain on this practice. And that leads, I think, to a lot of misunderstanding and even misinformation out there. I will also say that funeral directors, I am one, made their own problems with this. I think that as you know, roughly 150 years ago, the rise of the physician, the rise of the mortician, we stopped dying at home and started dying in more clinical places, often hospitals, this kind of thing. We became less and less connected to death care and then after death caring practices. And slowly, just like some kids don't know how to mail a letter or like how to address a letter, and some grown-ups like me don't know how to can peaches. I do. I do. We became we became distanced from after death caring practices and caring for our own dead. And at that time, the rise of the mortician, they stepped in and went, "Don't worry, we'll take care of this for you." Right? And in a capitalist society, taking care of it also looked like we're going to charge you for this. And very quickly, morticians realized that they could charge money for this practice that doesn't take that long, doesn't cost that much, and they could essentially create another revenue stream. I think that morticians did this to themselves. And it makes me very sad, and it makes me very proud to be a new kind of funeral director who is really actively out there doing things differently. So why is this new green, you know, self-professed newfangled funeral director? Why am I also okay with embalming, right? Isn't it bad for the environment? Isn't it something that the funeral homes are just charging us more for when we don't really need it? Yes to the first and sometimes to the second. But what I have seen in the death curious movement, in the alternative death caring movement in particular, is this pure, total, and uneducated revulsion for the practice. And that's what I want to kind of help us all interrogate and maybe tear down a little bit. You see, there are a couple of really good reasons for embalming. And if you go to funeral school, you're going to learn that embalming has three practices. The first is, or three serves three purposes. The first is sanitation. The second is preservation. And the third is restoration. And they will drill that into you. It'll be on all funeral board exams, right? Did you have to answer that at some point? I had to regurgitate that.
I was gonna say I have a lot of comments to make, don't worry. But yes, so far I'm agreeing with everything you're saying and yeah.
Yeah. Um, so the thing is that we can, in most cases, sanitize dead bodies with modern refrigeration and soap and water in virtually all cases. Not all, but virtually all cases. Preservation may be important sometimes. Embalming, modern embalming, not ancient Egyptian embalming, arose around the time of the Civil War when men were dying on the fields and wanted their bodies to be shipped, and their families wanted their bodies to be shipped home. And in order to do so, they had to be preserved, right? Preservation nowadays, especially from a non-violent death, can usually easily be dealt with really cool modern refrigeration, right? But restoration is the piece that I think gets short shrift in our communities. And for those of us who are death curious, who are death accepting, who are people who are working with family-led death caring or community-led death caring practices, sometimes restoration is an issue. Someone has died violently. Someone has died of a gunshot wound, dog bites, stabbing, if they have fallen from a great height, if their skin is, badly torn, ruptured, injured, what have you, if there are abscesses, if there have been certain illnesses that have really ravaged the body, the viewing experience would be incredibly unpleasant without embalming. And the simple fact is that for those of us in the death caring, community death caring movements, in the death curious and death accepting movement, we know the value of being with your dead. We know the value of sitting with and having that experience of viewing. Does it have to be in a funeral home, all stuffy and beige? No, no, it doesn't. But we know the value of that. So I think that one of the number one uses for embalming is exactly as I've said, when there has been a significant experience that has, somehow impacted the integrity of the body. I remember embalming a man who died doing what he loves. Boy, I hate that phrase. And he fell while mountaineering from great height. And I I can honestly tell you that I still occasionally, this is many years ago now, and I still occasionally have flashes of what I unzipped when I opened that bag. And I still occasionally have like drifting, I'm not going to say nightmares, but I will sometimes get pulled back to what I opened, what I saw when I opened that bag. This man died very far from home, and so there was a bit of a time delay before we even got him, and and he had fallen like that, like cartwheeling from a very great height, and his family needed to see him one more time. If I did not embalm that man, we would not have been able to give that family a comfortable viewing experience at all. It would have been absolutely traumatizing. As it was, after many hours of work, we had a hat on him and you could see about this much, and shockingly, one of his hands was just perfect. And so with some good draping and some positioning and the chemicals and a lot of time, I was able to create a meaningful viewing experience for this family. Another reason that embalming might be useful is that some people feel very strongly about being laid to rest on the land, in the land that they grew up in. It is often impossible, not always, but it is often impossible to move people by airplane without their bodies being embalmed. That's not 100% true 100% of the time, but most of the time. All right. And who are any of us to stand in the way of somebody's wishes as to where they want to rest, right? So that's another great example of when embalming just makes sense. There's a beautiful collective up here where I live in British Columbia, Canada, off the coast, little island town, island community, the Cortes Island, which is sort of 2 ferry rides away, so it's pretty remote. And a girl died on their island unexpectedly, which immediately in our province that means that becomes a coroner case. So she was removed from the island. Then her body was autopsied, And then she was finally cleared. She was what's called released so that the family could make their final arrangements. And all that family wanted to do was to have her buried on Cortez, and they wanted to have a home funeral. They have a cemetery on Cortez, but they don't have a funeral home, as it were, right? They wanted to bring her home. It, in fact, I don't believe the coroner would have allowed like would have cleared the body for travel unless they knew that it was going to be embalmed. My friend, whose name is also Christa, but spelt with a K, embalmed her and did a beautiful job. And she was able to return home. And autopsies are very invasive, very invasive. And there's an enormous damage to the integrity of the body. And a coroner process often can take more than a week. Bodies are refrigerated, but there's still, preservation is an issue. So the coroner allowed the home funeral and the transportation permits were issued, and my friend was able to do the embalming, and then this beautiful child was able to go home, and they were able to have a multi-day service and gathering that they would not have been able to have. And then they buried her in a green cemetery, by the way. And green cemeteries are supposed to not, have embalming, right? Well, green cemeteries can bend their own rules when certain circumstances are in place, right? So another time that embalming may be really needed is when it's culturally appropriate. In the African American community, homegoing services and multi-day viewings and expensive caskets and all sorts of other things are absolutely culturally appropriate, the right thing to do. And saying to somebody in a sort of knee-jerk response, embalming isn't good, really, I would just warmly invite folks to check their own cultural awareness when they're making those kinds of statements, right? Another time that embalming could be very good is infants. Infants will uh, decompose rapidly. Infants are very moist. They have a very, very high moisture content. And sometimes infants die in utero and are born after a day or two, sometimes even longer. And so the decomposition has already started. What the child that is born, we are getting so much better in our hospitals, both in States and Canada, about allowing families to stay with their little infant and whatnot. But I will tell you, again, as somebody who is the person opening the bag, I will tell you that no matter how much time you may have with your infant who is born after she's been dead for 2 or 3 days inside you, that might not be a very peaceful experience due to the decomposition that you will absolutely be holding in your arms. If you add a little bit of chemical to that, there you can firm up the tissues and you can create a more, I'm just going to use the word pleasant, but a more pleasant viewing experience and holding and cuddling experience. And if those of us in the community death caring field are anti-embalming, we could be taking away, we could be closing off opportunities for healing without truly understanding what those opportunities may be. In almost all cases of natural death, expected death, death that has not involved um, a an illness that is uh, on a very short list from the CDC in the States or from our Canadian or Health Canada up here. Um, as long as that's not the situation, all those other natural and expected deaths where the body is intact, you'd be hard pressed for me to ever suggest embalming in those circumstances. However, if I had picked up that it was important culturally for a family, I absolutely would not try and give them a lecture about the green impacts or any of that. I would do as told, right? That is not the time to be making a point. Um, so most of the time, not necessary. Sometimes, so I gave you the definition of arterial embalming, but you can also have very specific types of embalming. So you could do like a cranial embalming, for example, where you're just putting a little bit of fluid into certain parts, the ear, let's say. I've seen this when people died in certain positions, and then when moved to a viewing position, you might have some pretty significant decomposition or whatnot. You could actually do a partial embalming, and that would really increase the overall experience of those left behind. So my purpose really is to sort of make us think of embalming as more of a friend in the death caring community, but maybe just one that we don't hang out with very often, right? That kind of nerd specialist weirdo friend who really likes to talk way too much about his Lego trains, that friend, right? But we really wouldn't want to be without that friend, because that friend really can show up when we need that specific skill set. That friend has got us. And I think for too long, those of us in many, not all of us, but many of us in the death curious, death accepting, community death caring communities have really pushed embalming to the edges, or maybe even right out of our community. And I hope that this has given you some things to think about.
Yay.
Yeah.
You say everything that I literally, Nika was just in my class. I'm like, 90% of the time, not necessary. 10% of the time, very necessary. Because the whole point is to give the family the opportunity to be with them. I mean, I used to say I was the viewing queen. I wanted everybody to spend
Me
time
too.
with their loved one. Like that is such a huge crucial part of the grieving process, is to like be in that space. But Erin knows that was the one thing I would say is like babies have to be like almost always. And I think it's so important. I did a home funeral for a friend, and I said, they need to be embalmed if you're going to bring her home for a few days. And they're like, what? Like,
Yep.
Lauren? I was like, because we
Yep.
want to have a viewing. And, I was honest with the situation. And I do think that there is, I mean, we've had to school people before with the same kind of thing of like, no, it's horrible. I'm like, it is horrible. And also, there is always a time, especially you were talking about with restoration. Like I had to build an ear once, and
Mhm.
like it seems like not a big deal, but if that's all the family remembers, then that's a big deal. Like we're trying to create a space where they feel comfortable. I was talking about eye caps, and I was like, I'm probably one of the only like home funeral people that's always pro that, especially if somebody's done donation, because it doesn't feel right or natural when your loved one's eyeballs are sunken in like that.
Yeah.
Like we want to create a space where we're not causing trauma, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and like something beautiful. And is it needed always? No, absolutely not. But in those small times, like yeah, I'm just over the moon with everything that you shared.
Yay.
Yes,
Well,
you did a really beautiful job of explaining why and kind of rooting for the underdog, because it is important, and it well, that's what you did, and it does have a place. And ironically, uh, today's post on my social media was about how embalming is never required by law. Now I wish I would have added one slide about the 10%. Like Lauren said, we both always teach about when it is appropriate. But I think that the reason that it gets approached the way that it does, this like push it to the outskirts, is because what we see in educating people is so much of the opposite. So many stories where their loved one was the candidate that didn't need it. But they didn't know that, you know, the funeral director didn't make that explicit. I know it's probably down there in the fine print that nobody reads. And then they learn that it's not required by law. They learn about the process. They learn about other green alternatives, and they like grieve again that they didn't get to do it differently, and they wish they would have known, right? So I know that that's where my advocacy comes from. So it's really like we just need to change the education and how it is. And you probably do this in your practice, but how it is presented to people as being very much an option that makes sense in certain cases, not this is the default practice because it's just the best, you know?
Well, in BC, where British Columbia, Canada, here, where it's actually something that consumers have really started to grasp because it's not in fine print, like it's out there, and you know, it really has that conversation has shifted. I think the piece now is to get people like you, Erin, to add that extra slide
Yeah.
and to just put a little asterisk in and just say, listen, I get it, you know, but it's never required by law. And now what if somebody feels guilty for the choice that they've made? Kat, what do you have to say, my friend? Oh, you just muted yourself. There.
Oh, sorry. What were those three things? Restoration, preservation,
And
and
sanitation.
okay. Thank you. I just want to thank you. Uh, I'm a hospice worker for so long and a teacher also in the world of death and dying, and it's just so refreshing for me to hear you, Krista, to hear what you've shared, all of it, both on a professional and a personal level. So,
Thank you.
so, and I think what I'm really touched by in your presentation is the artistry of embalming. And, well, I want to say ministry of
Yes.
embalming, but the artistry that goes along with that to create the best comfort possible. And thank you for that. I hadn't ever thought of that before.
You're so welcome, and I'm so glad that came through. Do you know, I remember this one time another family, they were they were Filipino, and at home where they were from, outside of Manila, it was really common to have like multi-day home funerals, and it was very common for a slightly different type of embalming, but essentially the same, an arterial embalming to take place to allow these bodies to stay at home for quite a few days. And this was a very young man who had died very tragically and was also a coroner case, and he was autopsied, and yeah, you'll hear the common refrain there is autopsy. And his family, somebody just off the cuff, like, this is why we need death education just everywhere out there in every single tiny little crevice. Their family had not asked for a home funeral. And the place that I was working at the time wasn't known for home funerals at all. But they hadn't asked, and they were going along with this big service that they were Catholic. It was going to be in this order, and da 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 da. And somebody just off the cuff said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could bring him home?" And I was like, "You can, right?" And I hadn't thought to suggest that because the 99.999% of the people that I was dealing with at that funeral home would have been horrified, and you get into your way. And but thankfully this person said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice like at home, like how we do it at home?" And I was like, "We can do that." They were blown away. They thought that we were like kind of making a special exception just for them. They were like, "Can we tell people?" I'm like, "No, this is totally legal." But these things we have to follow certain processes and be cut. Now, here where I live, it would not have been mandatory for him to be embalmed to be at a home funeral. We can actually be at home unembalmed where I live. That's not true in all parts of North America, but it is true here. But because he was autopsied, there's no way that I would have allowed him to go home like that. And you know what? Actually, on the second day, they called my colleague called in a bit of a panic and was like, "Can you come with the makeup?" And I was like, "Oh, what happened?" And sure enough, afterwards, there had been a bit of settling, and he had a tiny bit of, this is a charming word, it's called purge. He had a tiny bit of purge that had been kind of leaking out of the side of his mouth when they opened the casket the next morning. And I was able to get there with my trusty little makeup kit and do a couple of things that frankly they could have done safely as well. But they don't feel comfortable like that. And so I was able to kind of like touch him up, and a better embalmer would have been able to prevent that in the first place, but I'm I'm really not that good. And this they were able to have like the second day of their viewing. And then they were able to go to church and to do their thing. And I remember dressing him in the clothes that had gotten sent. He was a young man. And so that I'm pretty sure the last time that he had died, sorry, the last time that he had worn those before he had died was like probably at high school graduation, which was clearly a few years ago, right? And so the young man had filled out a bit. And I remember like wrestling him into these clothes and didn't feel a lot like ministry at that point. But when I was done, I remember just spending this time with him and just telling him like how happy his family was to have him coming home, and how they would how I knew that he would know where he was. And it was just it was so special, and we wouldn't have been able to do it safely without embalming him.
I have a big, this is my big thing that, okay, so by law, embalming is not required. Every funeral home, except for a very small exception, say it's their policy that a
Mm.
body must be embalmed for a public viewing. And
Mhm.
this is a misconception that a lot of people have. It's not
Yeah.
safe to be around an unembalmed body. How do we change that? Because I think viewings are so important, but people hit this roadblock over and over again. Oh, well, you can do an ID view and we'll put them in a hospital gown. Like, how do we
Yeah.
change that? That's the place that I want.
Well, I think so where I live, luckily, policy can't trump law.
Right.
Where you live, maybe policy can trump law, but where I live, it can't. So how I deal with it is through death education. I have a lot of very public facing platforms. And so I am just out there as much as I can trying to, but not with the not required by law message. That's too broad, right? With this other message that know the things to ask, right? So I'm really lucky because if you've got one of those stupid big corporate funeral homes that's being like it's our policy, all that an educated consumer has to do is say, but that's not the law. And they back down, like even Dignity, even SCI will back down like that. I know that that's not going to be the case in all parts of the states, but in my province and mostly across Canada, policy doesn't trump law.
Hmm. And
So
that's true. Yeah.
empowering the consumer so that they know what to ask, they know what to say. And I got to tell you that I've never seen people back down so quick and in those big kind of greasy corporate spaces than when they know that they're dealing with an empowered consumer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a kitty or a dog?
It's my cat.
Why? So nice. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
assuming that you went in, and please correct me if my assumption is wrong, to the funeral industry through mortuary school and a more conventional route, when did you change? When did you become,
Oh,
more?
you're just assuming wrong.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah, no, I entered. I was in my late 40s when I entered this field, and I came from an educational background. And my sole intention was to get the licenses so that
Cool,
I could fuck with it from the inside.
cool,
Sorry for
cool.
that, but I knew that we are not doing this right. And we are too distanced from. I didn't like a lot of people come into this work and this realm through like a grief path or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. That was absolutely not my path. I was like, we are not doing this right. And I'm going to be one of the people who messes with it.
Yeah.
So I set out really early to mess with it. And it didn't make me a lot of like I did not win friends and influence people in the corporates. I did, of course, I went through mortuary school. That's how you have to do it up here. And then I did work for for the big one for a while. Then I
Okay,
worked for
wait.
the big Canadian one,
Okay.
that was just to get my license. Like it was just who would pay me the most while I did this thing. I remember one day it was I had been this huge, wonderful, splashy write-up in the Vancouver Sun, which at the time was like our big paper up here, and it was like a half-page top of fold spread in the in the session. And in any other environment, your employers would have been delighted, right? It was like talking about death won't kill you and whatever, and I got written up by HR
Yeah, makes
for
sense.
that. Now, I was not talking about anything to do with that with their company. I was not talking to do about anything to do with their policies. There didn't mention them at all. Didn't wasn't talking about funeral homes even. I was talking about the importance of talking about death and collectively facing our mortality. And like you can't get that kind of amazing advertising. And this short-sighted company like wrote me up, right? So no, I knew they would though, which is
Yeah.
probably also why I didn't tell them that I was going to do it. So I mean, I just did it and asked for forgiveness rather than asking for permission because I didn't want them to tell me I couldn't. I didn't, I was not going to stand for that. And then so I've been fully kind of on my own now for like 4 years, and it's been incredible. I hang my license at this wonderful, independent, woman-owned, morgue on-site funeral home here in BC, Canada. We don't yet have alkaline hydrolysis, water cremation, or natural organic reduction, human composting legal yet, but our team is working really hard on legalizing that. We will be the first funeral home that offers one or both of these things when it's finally legalized. We'll be the first or second. There's another one over on the island that might be the first. And we're, we're small and independent and scrappy. I don't really do the day-to-day work of funeral directing anymore. You kind of have to know me to have me as your funeral director now. I don't sit with people and do arrangements anymore, but I maintain a valid license and I maintain a valid embalming license as well. And I will probably until I retire. And of course, that allows me the ability, because it's a very regulated profession, that allows me the ability to do things that I put in quotes a typical death doula can't do. And my funeral home is, nobody is going to write me up at my funeral home when I get on the front page of a newspaper or on my radio column or my 100+ thousand followers on Instagram. Like I'm not going to get written up for that. I'm going to be celebrated for that because they like me. And the woman who owns my funeral home is absolute OG. Like she's been around for 20+ years in the field. Women 20 years ago, there weren't too many of us. It's really only been the last few years that things have tipped to having more women enter this field. So she's been around and she's an embalmer. And I remember talking to her very early when I was coming into this path and thinking that I wouldn't get the dual license. And she was like, get the dual license, And she was so green and she was so innovative. And I was like, why would you want me to get an embalming license? I thought you would support me in this decision. And she sat me down and gave me my first glimpse of this conversation. And and then I did the license and then I did the work and now I'll never stop talking about it. So,
Cool.
did we have something in the chat?
We do.
We have somebody from BC in the
Uh,
group here.
okay. Okay, like cranial embalming. Okay. Hi, Nanaimo Death Doula. That's spectacular. Wonderful. So so there's a couple of different ways. One of the most common ways would be using a syringe, right? So you essentially fill a syringe with the fluids, often a very, very, very high concentration, right, Lauren?
I was thinking about elderly fingertips as you were saying this,
Yes,
just going under the
yes,
fingernails
right.
to make them pink. Yeah.
And so you might like, yeah, you might do exactly something like that. Very common that you might just put a little bit in the ear or whatnot. So this could be in conjunction with an arterial embalming, but sometimes we will actually ask people to sign off on the embalming paperwork because there is a specific part of the body that we want to be able to introduce the chemicals to. And so another example actually of when embalming might be useful would be if somebody has had a growth, a cancerous growth or something like that that has disfigured them facially or on their neck or near this part of their body. And so we don't necessarily, you might, but you don't necessarily have to embalm the whole body, but you can do a post-death excision, and then using some chemical fluids, some embalming fluids, you would then sort of pack the area, stitch it up, use a bunch of specialized equipment, let it dry, maybe put some wax over it, and then a light dusting of makeup and whatnot. Maya, does that
Hi,
help?
yeah, that does help. I was wondering too, so would you still drain all of the body fluids if you're only doing one area?
No, typically no.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I just have to share really quick. I got written up once for doing a 4 hour viewing when it was just supposed to be a 1 hour viewing. And I was like, and they were like, well, he wasn't embalmed. And I was like, but he's been in the refrigerator for 48 hours. This is funeral home talk, but it was one of those things where, and this was in a corporate funeral home where I knew he was a young guy, died of an overdose. Like, I knew how important it was for this mom and his friends to
And what are you
spend
gonna do?
time.
TikTok, mom? Like,
Yeah,
come
right. Well, that's
on.
why I'm such a huge proponent for home funerals, because it's like you need to have that conversation at 2 o'clock in the morning. Here's your opportunity, versus, okay, if you want to do an extra hour, that's going to be another $195
Yeah.
and, whatever the overhead fee they want to charge at that time. So to limit somebody's time to be with the person they love because they're not embalmed is, I think, in America, or down here in the States, that is the biggest thing. I've had to advocate for families because the funeral director said their guts will fall out if they're not embalmed, which that means there's a really bad coroner,
Yeah.
first off, but that's not something you say to a family member.
It's totally not something you
And
say.
it's not true. Like, you can do restoration work for somebody who's, been through the coroner. Um, I've also had people say that it's unsafe to be around them if they're not embalmed, which again couldn't be further from the truth. I'm like, the embalming process is more unsafe to be around than a dead
And worse for
body.
the embalmer than anybody else, really.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm just curious why up there there's so much more like, oh yeah, okay, we won't because you understand it's the law. Because even down here, when people are like, well, it's our policy and we're not budging, who do we call? Like the embalming police? We can't, like, there's
Yeah,
they can be
yeah.
such bullies about it. I mean,
They can be
truly.
bullies. I mean, and up here, I think that there have been enough media, basically, who people call is media. And so
Mhm.
that's like a CBC Marketplace or something like that. And they have been these big corporates have been burned enough that they're like very on edge with it. And so I remember being at one corporate funeral home where they were like sure that whoever this person was on the other end of the phone, they were sure they were getting marketplaced. And they were, oh my God, they brought in all their big guns and whatever. They weren't. It was just a savvy shopper. But I was like, all right, that's fine. It's interesting too. And there's you'd said that caps, like eye caps for folks in the room, there are these little plastic pieces that kind of have little jet. They're shaped like this, and they just go over the eye socket, the eye. Or if an eye has been enucleated, if an eye has been taken out, or the cornea has been taken out and the eye is sunken, for example, usually for a organ donation, then you might pack a little bit of saturated cotton balls in, and then you would put this eye cap on. If the eye is just fine, but is at risk of falling in, you would lift up the eyelid and put this eye cap in. Some people in the really like natural and alternative death caring movements are even against this. Now, I don't say that we need to do that every time, but it is more peaceful to view somebody whose eyes are closed like this than somebody who's like half open and whatever, right? So like weigh what your ultimate goal is. And there's what drives me crazy is within the movement, there's one very big voice out there who is no longer able to be licensed and is enormously anti-embalming and anti any kind of body care that might be assisted with things, with things like forceps and eye caps. And I just don't think that's helpful. I think that actually harms the um, empowering our clients, empowering the public. I think it harms the death education movement by sensationalizing things,
Mhm.
and it makes me a little crazy. So I have been like so unbelievably grateful to you and to everything that you've been doing in the field for so long to just try and without sensationalizing and without making it all a big hullabaloo, just be honest about how inclusive this space really must be. So thank you. Yes, Kat.
So, as you're talking, I'm thinking about people who have educated me about the Tibetan tradition of icing the body. And the first time I heard about it was from a family in New York City who did this and had their person on ice for a couple days. And I was like, wow, they could do that there, and how useful that was. So I just want to mention that because it's another interesting option.
Absolutely. And up here, like we have cooling boards that we use that we'll take to, which is not what you're talking about, but um because that's quite a process, the icing piece is its own whole thing. Um, but there are all sorts of like that actually has practical roots, right? And so we can also bring all sorts of practical things into home funerals that might not be just all hemp and jute, Like sometimes we might bring something that we bought on Amazon, like a cooling board, you know?
And you brought up a really good point. Like, if you're going to do death education, it needs to be inclusive. And
Mhm.
I'm sure maybe you know Joelle, the grave woman.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was one of the things, like home or death comings, homecomings are such a big deal. Like, you can't hate on these conventional funerals because you're leaving out a whole group of people who actually look forward to this beautiful doing these embalmings, making them look
Multi-day.
over the top,
Yeah.
multi-day, all the flowers, all
Yeah.
the
Lots of
shebang,
blue eyeshadow and
all of
yeah.
it,
And
Like,
that's how it is and how it should be and how it must be. And our like unbelievable, I just wrote a piece in Talk Death Daily on this exact topic.
mhm.
And you could tell there was like lots of comments. Many of them were like thoughtful and nuanced and whatnot. And you could just tell the people who hadn't even read it and were like, it's never legally required. And okay, why don't you read the article? And then like,
The sensationalization part is
yeah,
is a big part of it too, where people hear a little bit of information and don't get the whole
off to
thing.
the races.
Yep. I
Yep.
think my student was the one who left early, and they just learned all of this, and I did the same exact thing. I'm like, you might think that I'm anti-embalming now. Listen to all this, but let me tell you how useful it is and when it's really appropriate, and the bottom line is that we're there to help support the family. The
Yeah.
end. Like,
The
my
end.
cat really loves this conversation.
Oh, isn't that funny? Oh, that's so
Yeah.
sweet. Kat, were you going to say something else?
Well, you read my mind very well. And I do have to go right at one, but I want to say I was teaching a class and a doula came up to me and said, which are you a doula? Which doula school did you go to? And I'm like, I've been doing this for so long. Yes, I am a doula. I'm in the life experience school.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, somebody said go check out the Death Wives. And so I took my doula training with you gals, and I know this is your last tea, but I want to tell you how special it has been for me to have been a part of your doula training. And I want to thank you. And I know you're making transitions, but I just want to honor you out loud for
Mm.
the time I had and all you have done together.
Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you. That
Yeah,
means a lot.
it does.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
And we're
beautiful
glad.
way to tie up, too. Thank you, Kat. Very ceremonial.
Mm-hmm. Feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me be part of the last one.
Yeah,
It was perfect.
it
I mean, I
was
feel like it
perfect.
was full circle of what we want people to know is it's not just this way. It's there's a spectrum of death care, and that's really important. And Kat, I just have to add, when people say like, "Well, what training do I need?" I'm like, "Well, this is Aaron knows this. I always say, if your neighbor said I need to go to the grocery store, can you sit with my husband who's dying? You wouldn't say, I'm not trained in that."
Totally.
And it's the same thing with end of life care. I'm like, some of your ancestors couldn't read and write, but they knew how to give reverence to the end of life and to how to care for a body. It's just the restrictions and like the corporatization of death care and these walls that they've put up that education is breaking down. Like that's the point of the education is we're breaking down those walls and reminding people, no, you don't have to go to 4 years of college. I mean, sometimes you do, but to be able to care for somebody at the end of life and to take care of their body and to have rituals and ceremonies. It's like we already know this.
We
And you know
know
what?
it,
It's, sorry, go ahead, Kat.
and to own it,
Yeah.
to own it as part of the life experience. That's
Hmm.
the home death movement is so good about that, and demystify it and all those great things. So
I
Reclaim it.
I actually reclaim it and remember. I have a program as well, and I it's not called this on the website. It's called the doula apprenticeship education program. But how I refer to it in my head is the "Don't Quit Your Day Job" doula course, and it's like it's this is not about a quick path to six figures and all that nonsense that you hear out there, right? This is about being in community and connecting and remembering things that we actually already know, but we have become distanced from. Do we need reminding? Do we need someone to help us remember how to can peaches sometimes? Absolutely. And that's what I'm here to do. That's what Lauren and Aaron and the Death Wives are here to do. And there's a lot of us that are emerging into this space that are doing it ethically, collaboratively, and with no nonsense around this idea of being certified or what have you, right? And we are only better together,
Yeah.
right?
Amen to that.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for everybody watching too, for
Yes.
joining us on this journey all these years. I want to say it's 5 years, Aaron. I'm just gonna
I
say,
feel like we started Tea Talks during COVID. Is that right?
So 6 years.
2020.
yeah,
So
so
probably
almost
six.
6 years. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Krista, for all the work you're doing. Thank you, everyone out there doing this work too, changing the narrative around death and dying, and we're doing it.
We're
Thank
doing
you.
it. Thanks everybody for being here.
Right.
Bye.
We'll make this available on the portal. So a couple people popped in late. You can watch the whole thing soon.
Yeah. Bye bye.